few months ago, I interviewed Professor Alfie Agnew, who not only is the head of the math department at Cal State Fullerton, he's also a member of the notorious Agnew family, whose brothers Rick and Frank were key figures in the Orange County, California hardcore scene back in the early 80s with bands like the Adolescents and Social Distortion and DI and TSOL and a bunch of others. At the time I spoke to Alfie, he had just released an album with his band, Professor and the Madman, with Rat Scabies and Paul Gray of the Damned. And their album, Seance, was one of my favorite albums of the year. A few months later, I was given the chance to speak to his older brother, Frank Agnew, who is also about to release an album with Greg Antista and the Lonely Street. And at first I thought, well, here we go. Going to find myself in the middle of a family squabble over whose record is better than who. And then they sent me the record, and it's fantastic. It's also filled with another great lineup of legendary musicians, including Jorge Disguster and Warren Renfro, who has also played with the Damned. The band are about to release an album called Under the Neon Heat, and it is just pure fun. It's a real pleasure to welcome the legendary Frank Agnew from the Adolescents and from Greg Antista and the Lonely Street on Baxy's Musical Podcast.
What is it?
It's Baxy's Musical Podcast.
I'll start right in because a few months ago I talked to your brother Alfie about his album with Professor and the Madman, and I legitimately enjoyed that album a lot. And so when I got the word that you would put it out an album too, I'm thinking, oh shit, I'm going to get in the middle of a family squabble. I'm going to draw brothers away from each other, and I'm going to cause family problems. So so I got the record, and it was a relief because I actually legitimately thought this is a great record too. Under the Neon Heat is fantastic. It's like one of those records that it's so listenable that you can enjoy every track from front to back. So congratulations on it. It's really wonderful.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Did you guys record this during the pandemic, or was this something that was going on before it started?
You know what? We finished it just as everything was getting shut down. Because, it was a year ago. I think February. Yeah, February a year ago. Because I just joined the band about a couple weeks before I recorded my parts. Greg had called me and asked me to join the band, and he said he was doing a new record, and I said yeah sure no problem. When you're recording, he goes a couple weeks. I'm like, okay.
Well, he could have said I'm in 10 minutes. He could have done that to you too.
Exactly. So when I went in there, I first visited the studio when the bass player was laying down his tracks, because the drums were done and Greg's rhythm track was done, and he just had scratch vocal, and the bass player was laying down his track. So I was kind of like listening to the songs, just kind of getting used to them. And before that, Greg had come over a couple times and just kind of with his acoustic guitar and just kind of showed me how they went. And then it was my turn to go in. Drums, bass, his rhythm guitar was done, and then I just kind of went in sort of fresh and laid down a bunch of guitar tracks, some keyboard tracks, and then we did all the vocals. And I went in, we did all the vocals, everything was finished, but he called me and said, there's a couple extra guitar parts I'd like you to put on. And it was me, Greg, and the engineer, and we went there, and that's when it was happening on the radio. Everything's getting shut down, and so we went in there, and I just kind of knocked out my last couple pieces, and then that day, I think, that day everything was getting shut down. So
wow.
We just finished recording it right when everything was closing.
You're lucky. Otherwise, you could have done it the way so many other people, including Alfie, where they're literally emailing each other's parts and trying to, piece it together like a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, I was, because that's the way I prefer to record.
When I'm talking to you, to a number of other people who have done it the way your brother did it, it's in a way, it kind of seems like, well, that's like witchcraft. I mean, what kind of sorcery allows you to do that? And guys our age, because we're about the same age. Guys our age are still trying to figure out, well, how do I get my phone to turn on without a home button? That's the kind of stuff we're trying to figure out. But then to do it in a more complicated, technologically disjointed way, to me, that's just it's magic.
It is, and it's interesting, and I like the fact that it allows you to have other ways to do it. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just an old guy or something. I prefer to just kind of have everyone around, because you're kind of feeling it. Yeah, it's I don't know. Maybe, but I just like the way it's like, okay, we're all hanging around, we're all cracking jokes, and okay, now let's do this track,
Yeah, I think, to me, I can almost, and maybe I'm just, listening too hard, but to me, I can almost feel a difference between, a band that's trying to squeeze it all together and a band that's actually together. I mean, I don't know if you can feel the difference or hear the difference. The other examples I've heard kind of seem like, had everybody been together in the studio at the same time. Now, whether it's a live recording or not, it's not really the issue. It just, to me, I can hear it. It's kind of like, when I'm on the radio or listening to a radio station and I can tell someone has pre-recorded their show. I can tell, but the average person may not be able to tell.
I could completely tell. To me, it's really obvious.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like a fractional hair off time, if that makes sense.
It does, because there's just something about being in there with everyone, and you're just all kind of feeding off each other that adds a little something.
Oh, I do want to talk to you about your family here for a minute, because I find it fascinating. You got two brothers. Your older brother Rick, and then you got Alfie, and you and Rick are in all these legendary bands. I mean, the Adolescents and Social Distortion and Christian Death and TSOL and all these bands. And then you got Alfie smearing the family name by getting a PhD in mathematics. What was wrong with that kid?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because, all of us brothers were kind of naturals at music and math. Alfie just took it seriously. You know what I mean? Yeah, he was one of those out of high school into college kind of guys. He was always more together than say Rick or I. Rick was always really good at math and art and all that stuff. But Rick was more of a free spirit. You know, Alfie was more disciplined and kind of goes, "Oh, okay, I could do this. I think I'll just kind of take this road and do well." And he has.
Yeah. And meanwhile, you're left with the middle child syndrome.
Perfect. Yeah, pretty much. I actually kind of fall somewhere between the two, I'm less disciplined than Alf, but more so than Rick. And, but Rick has that very artistic mind, I don't think he had the patience to sit there in class, year after year and do. I mean, he definitely had the brains for it,
right?
But he just didn't have the patience for it, And I kind of felt somewhere in between. I went to college for about 3.5 years, and then I got impatient. Looking back, I wish I would have finished because I wasn't too far from finishing, but it was just one of those things where it's like I feel like getting antsy.
Whereas I went to I went to college for 5.5 years to get my bachelor's degree because I didn't want to learn too much too fast. I thought that I didn't want to cram it all in. I thought let's pace this thing out as much as possible and simultaneously piss my parents' money away at the same time. I did a good job of that.
Yeah. I mean, that is the nice thing about college. You can take as long as you want if you have the means, or you can always go back. And because sometimes lately I'm going, maybe one day I'll go back and finish.
It's not too late. You're in your 50s. You could easily finish up.
Yeah, It's like, maybe one day I'll do that. I've actually entertained that idea.
When I go back to the 80s and I think about bands back then. Here you are in the Adolescents, which is actually a very, very important band in the sense that it was like one of the very first bands of hardcore bands in America that got like a national distribution. I mean, out here on the East Coast, sometimes it was really hard to get your hands on records because, I mean, you read about them, you look for them, but they're not available. So, the Adolescents was one of those records that was available. It's 1981. And the thing that just it floors me is you were 16 years old when you joined that band the year before. I mean, 16 years old, and all of a sudden you've got a record that's being distributed nationwide. So what was that like to be that young and to see this record that kind of still holds up in a lot of ways get to a point where, it is a lauded album?
Yeah, it's at the time when the Adolescents first formed, January 80, it was Soto started. It was him, me, Tony, and a couple other guys.
Right.
And that lineup lasted about 6 months, and then those two guys were gone, and then we brought in Rick and Casey, and then that's when it gelled. That's when it really started to work, and then things started happening kind of fast. And because when the band first formed, I was 15, and I was thinking, cool, we'll get together, play some house parties, maybe even play a club or two. That'd be great. When Rick and Casey joined, and then, Rick's songs were added to the mix, it just brought us to like this whole another level, and things started happening really fast. And then, fast forward to February 81, and Lisa assigns us to do a record. And we recorded that in the end of end of February, I think. And we knocked that out in 4 days. That whole record from start to finish was done in 4 days.
Really?
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and that was it. Monday we recorded all the basic tracks. Tuesday, Rick and I did all our guitar overdubs. Wednesday was all the vocals, and then Thursday was mix and edit, done. And it went quick because we essentially kind of recorded our live set at the time. When you listen to the Blue album, that was essentially our live set. Maybe there was a song or two switched. But other than that, when you saw us live back then, that's kind of what you heard was that Blue album.
And when I say that album kind of holds, I was just listening to it the other day just to kind of refresh my memory on it. And because, I mean, it's not an album I've ever forgotten, but it's like, what was it about that record? And people remember, Kids of the Black Hole and Amoeba and No Way, which I think, to me doesn't sound like a band that would be put together with a 16-year-old kid in it. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's actually kind of a sophisticated song. And whenever you see a band full of 16-year-olds, it's either, their songs are not that great or they're playing Skynyrd covers, and that's what they do. But this was very, very different for guys who were that young at the time.
Well, yeah, because like I said, when we first got together, I'd been playing about 3 years, I think. And same thing with Soto. And Tony had never been in a band or anything like that. So Soto grabbed him in because he thought he looked cool. And, but me, Rick, and Soto, we were big 60s and 70s music fans. We were all big Beatle fans. We're little kids, and growing up with Beatles and all those kind of bands. And when I first started playing guitar, I think I was about 12. I'm an introvert, so when I got my first guitar, I just, would sit at home day after day just teaching myself how to play. And so by the time I was 15 and 16, I was okay. And then, Rick was playing instruments too, and oftentimes him and I would just jam together and, and just kind of feed off each other. And we played a lot and learned a lot because, like me, I was always trying to figure out Beatles songs or different stuff like that. And I guess for my age, I was pretty good.
Yeah, you were okay. you were able to make do.
So, but I think what made us sound really good was we used to practice a lot. I mean, me, Steve, and Tony were in high school, and so it's not we didn't have jobs or anything. And then Rick and Casey were both kind of free spirits, and so we practiced all the time because there was not a whole lot else to do. And I think that's how we got really good as a band. We just rehearsed all the time because out of boredom, we all played well together, so we got good quick. And and then Rick's songwriting was really good for that. He was coming up with stuff that no punk band was doing at the time.
No, definitely not. And like I said, when I hear those songs off that first record, you can tell this isn't like any other band coming out of Orange County or anywhere else on the West Coast at the time. I mean, there was some sameness to a lot of the West Coast hardcore stuff. Adolescents is not among those that is the same. I wouldn't even say like Agent Orange sounded the same because I mean they certainly had more of a surf punk thing about them, but there was a lot of the same type of stuff with a lot of bands. The Cream rose to the top, obviously the Black Flags and stuff like that. But for Orange County, I mean, you guys were very, very different.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that had to do with Rick's writing, because the one thing that him and I were into was doing interesting guitar stuff. We rarely did the same thing at the same time, because we thought, well, shit, if we're going to be a two-guitar band, why have them playing the same thing and just muddying it up? Someone will do the rhythm, and then someone will be doing something over that. And so that's how we always approached it. Okay, while you're doing that, maybe I could be doing this, or that sort of thing. So we never thought, okay, well, here's all the chords. Let's just, turn up the Marshalls all the way and just make a double noise. We never approached it that way. It was more like, let's make this interesting.
I do want to ask you about Steve Soto, though, because I think he's one of those guys that people probably should know a little bit more about. In a lot of ways, he's kind of one of these central figures that ties a lot of dots together. Agent Orange, the Adolescents, and he goes on. And I know that he and Greg Antista were very, very close friends. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, one of the songs of the new record, I think it's Broken Glass, is about his friendship with Steve. So tell me what Steve Soto was like. Well,
I met Steve through Rick because back then Rick was, kind of like the guy about town. And I remember coming home, goes, hey, there's this great new punk band called Agent Orange. And I met those guys, and there's these kids, and they're really cool, and and that sort of thing. And I met Steve at a house party. And this was like in the spring of '79, and him and I hit it off right away. We just started talking about all the music we were into at the time, and we're all into the whole punk music thing, and oh yeah, this band's great, and then we talked about the music we grew up with, and we just totally hit it off. So after he left Agent Orange and started the Adolescents, he asked Rick to join. But Rick was in the Detours at the time, and so Rick said, you should get my brother Frank. And so that's when Soto called me. And, because he was determined to get a band that would outdo Agent Orange, because I think they kind of let him go, and he was pretty hurt by that. And so, I think part of the reason for him forming the Adolescents was to make a band that would be better than Agent Orange. So, I'll show you guys, you know what I mean?
and also to name a band alphabetically that goes before Agent Orange, and maybe right before it in a record store. So
it's funny. I never thought of that.
Well, I was just thinking about that now. So, Agent Orange, AG, Adolescents, AD. I'm sure, out of spite, the best way to tell your former bandmates to go screw themselves is to be just slightly a little bit ahead of the other band.
Yeah, you know what? Maybe there was something You know what? There probably was something to that, knowing, because I know that him and Tony came up with that name, and so, I'm all, okay, Adolescents, cool. Yeah, it makes sense. We're a bunch of kids. Cool. That I didn't think too much about that, but that's funny. I bet you there might have been something there.
Well, I'm always for identifying the most spiteful thing imaginable. So that's good.
It was cool because after about 6 months or so, we were playing all the same places that Agent Orange was playing. So they were our friends again, and everything was cool.
Right.
That kind of thing. But yeah, Steve. He was very driven, very much an extrovert, very driven, and just really friendly guy. He's the guy that made things happen.
So
wonderful guy, really miss him.
So and with Greg Antista, I mean, the two of them were also very close, correct?
Oh yeah, because they went to high school together, and pretty much from about 1980, because I first met Greg Antista because Steve brought him around. And so I believe I met Greg at the Black Hole apartment probably about a month after the Adolescents formed. And, the three of us hung out a lot in those days,
right.
Even when the Adolescents, when that was happening, and even when that was over for pretty much throughout the 80s, me and Soto hung out. Him and I were closest in the Adolescents, probably because we were close in age and temperament and all that stuff, But Greg was always around too. So I feel like now being in a band with Greg, it's like, oh, okay, well, it makes sense.
It's interesting. I was reading. Keith Morris had written a book a few years ago from the Circle Jerks, and called My Damage. And one of the things that struck me in the book is throughout, and I don't think it's necessarily only a West Coast thing, because the East Coast was doing it too. It's such a small community of bands and a small community of people that there's if you ever did like the family tree of punk rock or hardcore, it's a very convoluted root system. And it's interesting to me that out of all the years that you've known each other, this is the first time that you've recorded anything with Greg Antista, which I think that's
exactly
very strange to me that it's taken until 2021 for the two of you to get together.
That's funny. I never thought about that either. But it's true. Because we have hung around in the same circles forever. And, Greg started, he picked up a bass and learned a few notes and started his band not too long at, probably later in 80, because he was hanging out with me and Soto, and he goes, this looks fun. So he used to have a couple pawn shops around the corner where we lived. And, they had these cheap, shitty basses, and he just bought one and taught himself how to play and started his band. I think they were called the G-Men. I think so, and then he started doing his thing, and, we all hung up. But yeah, it's strange that him and I never really recorded together or anything like that throughout all these years, even though we've been friends throughout all these years. I guess some things just take longer than others.
It's like you used to be in a band too. After all these years, we should maybe do something.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because when I joined them and we started getting ready for the record, it felt like coming home week. It just felt really natural. Like even through our playing, the best way I could explain it is you could feel the years of friendship, if that makes sense.
Right. Not that you can necessarily tell that everyone's getting along in a band, because, sometimes, production or whatever, or the million takes you do in a studio make a difference. But there's something so infectious about this record. You can tell that if it weren't you guys who were having fun, I'm having fun at least listening to it. It just sounded like a fun experience.
We had a great time. this is the first time in decades I look forward to rehearsal.
But it's the kind of music I think kind of lends itself to that too, because it sounds like it has to be just fun to play.
It is. That was one of the things that convinced me to really do it. When Greg was playing me some of the songs, the thing that struck me was how upbeat they were. I mean, his lyrics cover a variety of things, and it's not all happiness, but there's something about the music that just, it's uplifting. It's upbeat. It's not depressing. This is fun music. It's like, it's like Cheap Trick or something. Like when you put on a Cheap Trick record, you can't help but smile. Or like a Ramones record, you put one on, you can't help but smile.
It sounds like in a way like a very happy Social Distortion.
Yeah.
I mean, there's there's good reason for that, but it does sound that way.
And it's interesting because for some time now, I just kind of got burned out on, let's just go make a band and act all bummed because it's hip to be bummed. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I realize, as soon as especially when I hit 50, I'm all, I'm pretty fucking happy to be alive considering all the shit we did back in the day. So it's like, and I'm sitting there thinking, you know what? Okay, at this point, I got 3 kids. They're all good kids. They're all adults now. I'm not starving. I have pretty much everything I really need. I'm pretty happy. I'm not pissed off or bummed out about anything. So, it would be phony just, to think, okay, we're playing in a punk type band, so now we got to act like we're pissed off at something. I ain't really pissed off at anything at the moment.
No, but on the other hand, I can see a band, and maybe not yours but a band at some point with guys our age singing songs about it hurts to get up. I can't believe this colonoscopy prep has to have a liquid diet. Like that kind of thing. It's like, those are the kinds of songs I'm waiting for a band to do. Songs about a prostate examination. That's what I'm waiting for.
Well, see, because that's just it, because if you have a bunch of old farts just acting like they're angry because, they don't like the government and shit like that or whatever. I mean, it's like, okay, well, I could see that, but yeah, I think you're right. I think in order for, if you're going to be an old band that's pissed off, you've got to be relevant, because, I mean, you said it right there. One of my biggest bitches is climbing out of bed in the morning and feeling like I'm going to break into 10 pieces.
It's like, hey, you get off a couch and you make that noise that your father made. It's like, okay, that's a song right there. It's called "Ooh, That Hurts."
You know what? That is a song because I don't know how many times in just the last couple of years I'm all, shit, I'm turning into my dad. Like literally, and like I'll look at my hands, I'm all, holy shit, those look like the way my dad's hands look. I'm all turning into my dad. I'm making the same sounds, and I'm taking the same amount of time to get off the couch.
So, are you guys planning on getting on the road with this record, or are there plans to go on the road?
I think right now there are definitely plans to play shows. I think it's kind of hard to tell, because with the COVID thing still kind of there, even though things are opening up and stuff like that, one of the big problems with traditional touring is the cost. The cost of touring, gas is through the roof, and you would rent a bus and that sort of thing. I mean, I think what we were talking about is like, let's just do like for example in August there's some festival out in Utah. Okay, we're either going to drive out there or fly out there and do the show and then come back, and then maybe go to the East Coast, do like two or three choice shows and then come back. I personally would like to do stuff like that instead of just kind of like hopping in a van and slugging it. First of all, I'm too fucking old to do that.
I was just going to say, you sound like a 56-year-old man. The damn price of gasoline, and I got to have my dinner by 3:30.
I think we're onto a concept album here.
we might just be. Like I said, I've been listening to the record. I know there's a couple of songs on it that are kind of being pushed. Tijuana Jail, Down on Commonwealth, but I loved Halfway to Whole. I think that's maybe my favorite song on the whole album.
I like that one too.
Yeah, it's a really, really good song.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff on it, and what was fun for me recording it, because Greg, he just kind of goes, just kind of have at it, and I said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just throw a bunch of shit on there, and then mix in what you want and get rid of what you don't. And so it was really cool, like because when you mentioned it, Halfway to Whole, I took a whole different approach to that song than I did a lot of the others. You know what I mean?
Right.
And he'd sit there and go, he goes, that sounds cool. He goes, that sounds cool. Go with that. And then, we'd record that, and then I'd try something else, and, and he goes, well, I'll decide later if it works or not. Well, it's there, But that's what's been fun making this record, because the songs, like you said, I think the songs, each song kind of stands up on its own. It's not just like one long protracted song that's broken up with silence every 2 minutes.
No, not at all. And it's not like you have a song that doesn't feel like it wasn't fleshed out, and there should be more to it. It's like every song was as it should be. It's like they were all very, very well thought out, approachable songs. From a listener's point of view, you could just tell this is a well crafted bunch of material.
Yeah, and that's the way I like to do things, because another thing I like working with Greg is, he allows me to just kind of put my interpretation on it.
Right.
He'll sit there and go, okay, well, this is it. What do you think? Come up with all kinds of stuff. But then, I'll come up with a bunch of different stuff, and he goes, okay, I like that. I like that. Maybe do a little more with it. So it's just been a blast. And I think by doing that approach, each song, is a little special, because it's not like we used any formula. Because that's one thing I hate approaching a record. Is like, okay, well, okay, here are all the songs. They all go like this. They all have this arrangement and structure. And then, I like treating each song as its own individual baby.
You definitely succeeded with that on this record, under the Neon Heat with Greg Antista and the Lonely Streets. Frank, it's a real pleasure to talk to you. Again, great job on this record. I hope you guys come out east and play a few shows when you can put together the money or your AARP discount to get the gasoline. Or
double ARP discount.
I mean,
well, you know what? I would love to go out there, because I haven't been out to the East Coast in quite a while. And, and every time I went out there, I had a great time.
Well, I would love to see you guys play, because I've seen stuff on YouTube and, even before you joined the band. And it just sounds like a really, really, really good band, and that plays great live too. So it's a real pleasure to listen to the record, and a real pleasure to talk to you, Frank. I do appreciate it today.
Likewise. This has been a great conversation. Thanks for calling. I appreciate it.
No problem, Frank. Thank you so much. The name of the record is Under the Neon Heat by Greg Antista and the Lonely Street, available on Primal Beat Records. Thanks for listening to the show. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can always email me at bax@rock102.com. Also, check out our social media on Facebook, Instagram, and everywhere else we're at. And be sure to share it amongst your friends, subscribe it, like it, give it a nice review when you get a chance. And we'll see you next time on Baxi's Musical Podcast.